Held gives us three further examples to clarify how it is that the ethics of care can advocate for a version of justice that in fact is committed to the kind of partiality that traditional ethical theories tend to condemn. Those three examples have to do with a baby, a drowning, and a father who is also a teacher. So in the first example, Held asks, is it immoral for parents to love their infant child more than any other person in the world? Is it simply an emotional reaction they should outgrow as time goes on? It would appear to go against Kantian duty, the Kantian duty to treat everyone with equal respect, every rational being with equal respect, to love your own infant baby, infant child, more than any other person in the world. It seems that Kant would have us love every rational being equally. And a certain psychological reading would say that the parents' love for their child, their disproportionate or at least partial love for their child, is an example of a psychological, emotional fact and not an ethical fact. But the ethics of care would say that the emotion that the parents feel for the baby is an ethical issue because it's an ethical value, because it's a recognition of special obligations that parents have toward their children. And those obligations are permanent and should never be outgrown. So parents should help their children when they need it and when they can. And parents should stretch really far to try to help them, probably throughout their lives. So the ethics of care recognizes the particularity of the parent-child relationship. It also recognizes that our ethically important relationships are not between strangers, but between people who are in positions of care for one another. Held still wants to recognize that care can go wrong. So parents don't always care for their children. So once on a visit to Guatemala, I met a young man who was born in Guatemala but ended up in the United States as a result of his father selling him to a couple, an American couple who wanted to adopt him. I was in the same hostel that he was in as he was searching for his father, his biological father. And it turns out his father sold him for about $30 worth of Guatemalan money, which essentially was beer money. His father was very much of an alcoholic. And so you can look at that and say, not every parent cares for their children. And that's not even the most egregious case I can think of. But the exceptions really prove the rule. The reason we react so viscerally to a parent who abuses their child in some way is that we have this sense that there is something essentially sacred about the bond between the parent and the child that should never be violated. Second example is also interesting. If a man is in a situation where two people's lives are at risk, let's say two people are drowning and he can only save one of them, is he justified in saving his spouse instead of saving the stranger? Now, Kant and some other folks who agree with him say there's a conflict in this situation between duty and affection. Duty would require us to value both lives equally, both that of the stranger and that of the spouse, and to struggle against anything in us that would lead us to favor one person over another. So the answer might just be to save the one who's easier to save or physically closer to you. You should not be motivated by the emotion of affection, but by reason. Someone else might say, it's merely a psychological conflict. It's not a moral conflict. But the ethics of care say that this absolutely is a moral issue and not just a psychological one. We should say, for Held, that the relationship between this person and the spouse is an ethically valuable relationship, and that he's right to save his spouse rather than the stranger. That I call the saving a life or a wife example. And the final example is the father-teacher example, which I think is one of the most interesting things in Held's book. And the father-teacher example goes like this. There is a father who is also a very talented teacher. He's very talented at helping children who are struggling in school. And so the question is, should he spend more time with the school children, let's say, extend his workday in order to do after-school tutoring, or should he reserve that time for his own child at home who might need as much help from him as the students do? Utilitarianism would say, spend more time with the school children because you can promote the greatest happiness for the greatest number that way. 20 kids at school, 1 kid at home. If you can improve the learning of 20 kids versus improving the learning of 1 kid, then you should choose the 20 kids. Kantian morality would say that the most important thing is to respect all persons equally. So let's say if he has 7 students and 1 child, each child should get 1/8 of his time. Each of his students should get 1/8 of his time, and each of his students should get 1/8 of his time, and then the remaining 1/8 should go to his child. Now, I think there you can see how ridiculous the Kantian judgment of the situation is, as well as of the utilitarian judgment. So here, the ethics of care would say, the obligations of care are paramount. There is nothing beyond the obligations of care. We have a problem. The father-teacher has 2 caring relationships, one with his students and one with his child. He has an obligation to care for his children at school so far as their academic success is concerned. That's the basis of his caring relationship with them. But he's responsible for the overall well-being of his child, academic success, but also physical health, psychological health, all of his needs, and even most of his desires. He's responsible for the child's full development as a human being, not just the child's academic success. The teacher relationship, on the other hand, is based on using his skill in a professional setting. He may feel affection for the children on a good day, but his whole relationship with his child, his whole relationship with his child is based on love, trust, and loyalty. And we can see this if we change the example slightly. Would the same teacher be morally justified in transferring to another school where he can use his skills even more effectively, say with smaller classes or more resources, or kids who need him more? Sure, no problem. He can be replaced in his original school with someone equally talented or even more talented than himself. Not a problem at all. But could he say, there's a child over here who needs me more than my child does, is maybe a better match for my parenting skills than my child? Would it be okay just to replace this child with another, to become someone else's child rather than my own child's father? Of course, absolutely not. It's a ridiculous question. One action, the action of moving from one school to another, does not violate a relationship. But moving from one child to another in one's parenting role, when the other child is one that isn't one's own child, you leave your own child for someone else's child, of course, that's a violation of care, it's a violation of a relationship. And so Held wants us to look at examples like these three and to say, there is something special. We have special obligations within the special relationships that we have, and to go to the overall theme of the reading. When justice, viewed in the traditional sense of impartiality, and care conflict, Held wants to say care should win. And in fact, not only should care win, but we should revise our entire conception of justice into a caring conception of justice.